Это шоу Will.
Let me just say it's a great honor to speak to you today. I'm glad you made time to speak to me, and it's just great to be with you today.
And I just would like to ask you and your vision, because I think that you are a wise person, one of the wisest person in the world. So your opinion is really important for me. So I would like to ask you, what is your views? How things is going in the US, and how did the crisis hit the US? And first, how did it impact on the world economy?
We have a problem with high inflation through food and energy costs, for example, and also just disruption of supply lines and disruption of really the whole world order that we've had for so many years. So China is reopening, and that's going to have positive effects on global growth. It might have add some added pressure to inflation, but that remains to be seen. So. And I know that doesn't help Ukraine in your critical struggle against the invader.
But my question is about your opinion. Why do you think Russia was able to overcome the sanctions policy? I'm told that sanctions are hitting the European economy and the Eurozone more than Russia, so more than we expected too. So are the sanctions working? Or something wrong? Russia's GDP has grown, and it is now if I'm not wrong, the 9th in the world. So how do you assess the policy of the Central Bank of Russia, for example? So they managed to save the ruble. Why?
Yeah, so I should say that in our system, in our governmental system, it's really the administration, which is to say, we're not part of the administration. We're an independent central bank. So the Treasury Department, Janet Yellen, and the White House, of course, President Biden and his people, they really create, devise, and enforce the sanctions.
Yeah, I agree.
We have a fairly modest role in that. But I would say a couple of things. First, just you're right. It seems like the Russians have been able to avoid the harshest application of the sanctions. We all know the head of the central bank in Russia. She's quite capable. She was. I'd be very surprised if she was supportive of the war at all. But she's quite good at her job. She's extraordinarily capable. We know her from international circles. For years she's been attending meetings of central banks, and she's quite well thought of as a technical matter, quite knowledgeable and smart. So she will have done, things to enable, the Russians to avoid sanctions to the maximum extent possible. Although we still think that the sanctions are hurting them, just not as much as we would have hoped.
And I think, but do you think it's only job of Russian central bank, or maybe it's also deserves of, or it's a work of Russian government too?
Oh, very much both. Very much both. Obviously they're doing everything they can to sell their oil to the Chinese and the Indians, and they're buying it. So, but yes, they've worked. We've imposed sanctions across, essentially every economic activity we can touch. We being the elected government, the administration, not the Fed, and they're doing everything they can to avoid those, and they can avoid some of it, but not all of it.
On your opinion, which countries also suffered more from recent political situation and in economy?
Well, I would say not the United States. We have our own energy here, and so it's really not us. I mean, it's going to be the Eastern European. You know better than I do, but it's going to be Poland and the Eastern European countries that are right there close to Ukraine. I would think they're the ones who have suffered. I'm aware that Ukraine's suffering is, I can't personally experience it, but we all see what's happening. People like me just want to support you in any way we can. But I have limited ways to do that in my professional job.
So I just talked to Christine Lagarde recently, and she told that they have already tried to minimize inflation. It's they got already around 7% inflation. It's a prediction for them, but there are a lot of many countries. So, what do you have your prediction about inflation in the US?
I do, yes. Our policy rate quite a lot last year in order to slow the growth of the U.S. economy and enable inflation to come down, and we think that's working now. And I think we're very much on track to get inflation back down to our target, which is 2%. A lot depends on what happens in Ukraine on that, and what happens with Russia and their energy, and also with the opening of China.
If the rate is raised further, the standard of living of the population will fall. So how much should it fall in order for the Fed to stop raising the rate?
You know, we've raised rates quite a lot, and the market is already pricing in two more quarter percentage point rate hikes. We'll look around after we make those two, and we'll say, should we do any more? And then the question will be, how long do we keep rates at this level? And I think we'll keep them there for quite some time.
Because the decrease in inflation is clearly less than we would like. And if it starts to rise, is the Fed ready to raise the rate sharply again?
Yes, of course. We will. If we need to raise our rates more, then we'll absolutely do that. We raised rates very sharply, historically sharply last year to get to the place we're at now.
In other words, does the Fed think that inflation should be reduced to 2% at any cost?
Well, so we think we do need to reduce inflation to 2%. That is our obligation. But I think the path there, as we walk that path down to 2%, we'll also be considering, not at this point, but a little further on, we'll be considering the effects on the labor market as well.
Well, so you mentioned unemployment. The Fed previously had disagreements with the Department of Labor, if I'm not wrong. So regarding the assessment of unemployment, so the Fed believed that the Department of Labor was improving indicators. So how was the situation? Because the Department of Labor says, as always, that everything is fine and the length of the working week in hours is being reduced. It was, if I'm not wrong, 34.4 in November, 34.5 hours were expected in December, but it turned out to be 34.3, a sign of an intensification of the crisis. And we can say that the PMI indicates that are falling below 50.
Sure. You also pointed out that, though, to the average work week, there are some modest signs that the labor market is weakening. And for example, the number of hours worked per week ticked down a very small amount. That is a sign of a slight softening in labor market conditions. That is true. In addition, wages, which have been very, very high, we track wages quite carefully. The increases, they're still very high increases, but the increases have been declining a little bit. And that's a good thing because too high wage inflation causes price inflation. Our mandate is for price inflation, not wage inflation. And it's older people in particular have dropped out of the labor force, have retired, and they don't want to come back because they don't want to take any risk on COVID. But the U.S. labor force has really shrunk since COVID in a way that's very surprising, and so we have a labor shortage in a way. We have a shortage of available workers, and that's part of what makes it hard to get inflation down. But what we're going to find is that growth in 2022 was positive but modest. It was subdued, so 1% around that level. In terms of this year, most forecasts call for the U.S. economy to continue to grow, but at a pretty subdued level. So growth of less than 1%, let's say. But we would tell you that a recession is almost as likely as very slow growth. So that's a fact, and I think that is partly because of us having raised rates quite a bit. But this is what it takes to get inflation down. To get inflation off of we've had inflation at its highest level in 40 years. To get inflation to come down, what we need is a period of slower growth so that the economy can cool off, so the labor market can cool off, so that wages can cool off, and so that's how inflation comes down. That's the only way we know to bring inflation down. And it can be painful, but we don't know of any painless way for inflation to come down.
And what kind of risk do you see for world economy now, and especially for the US? What is your assessment?
So when growth is very slow already, any kind of a shock, any kind of a negative event, whether it be, problems with a new COVID strain or some kind of terrible event in Ukraine that that we don't want to see in Ukraine, something like that, some negative shock that could put the U.S. economy in recession. As for risks, the risks are clearly, what happens in Ukraine is really going to matter, and clearly what happens in China will matter. In the United States, I think we have a risk from this thing you're reading about, the debt ceiling. There's going to be a big confrontation in the next few months.
But what is U.S. government debt? So what is the problem now? What is the problem with U.S. governmental debt?
Government debt? Well,
yeah.
So we have this system. We're the only major country that has the following system. Congress votes to spend money, and then we're spending more money than we're taking in, so we're having to borrow to fund the approved spending. And now, but we haven't voted to approve the borrowing. So there's a separate vote coming up in June, and we're the only country in any system of government. When you vote to spend the money, you're also authorizing the borrowing necessary to fund that. Only in the United States. So, but when you're operating at a deficit, and we are operating at a deficit right now, you literally don't have the money to spend if you can't borrow anymore. And so there's a battle over what it will take to get the debt ceiling raised.
So what is your forecast about that battle?
That battle, and it's not a question of having the ability to pay our bills. It's a question of one political party trying to use its leverage to dictate to the other political party what fiscal policy to do. In other words, they want to see spending cuts and that kind of thing. So it's a confrontation that happens in the U.S. system. It happened in 1994. It happened in 2011. It happens every 5 or 6 years. By the way, this is the Treasury Department's business, not the Fed.
No, I know that. I talked to Christine Lagarde, and she told me it doesn't matter who will win in economy, but there will be win for the U.S. because the U.S. is the biggest country and it has resources to support us with the military assistance, and that's why we are strong. And there will be only one winner who has a big gun. She told me that.
I like that.
Thank you, dear Chair. Thank you very much. And one of my last question: what do you think about Davos as a summit? I took a part there, but I think that it's not so influenceable as it was before.
It's not Davos. We don't attend Davos. It's more. It's a little. We use the word flashy. It's a lot of people with a lot of very wealthy people with private jets and things like that. So I know I know Christine Lagarde, and other central bankers go, but we don't go. I think it's an interesting group. You'll meet a lot of world business leaders and world government leaders there. I think it's worth going once or twice. But it has a little bit of a stigma associated with, I don't know. It's not a great place for the Fed to be.
If you could present me a printing press, I would be really happy.
We have one of those, but we keep it in the basement.
Oh, okay.
I know
So,
but again, I know you're going to be dependent on a lot of help from the West and from the United States, and I don't have my hands on that, in control of that, but I'll always be a voice for supporting you. That's
mhm.
really that's all I can offer you because it's not our role, but believe me, I support you, and so many Americans do. So many Americans.
Okay, or you could also build a 14th bank of the Fed on our territory. So you could be.
We could do that. Let me come back to you on that. Maybe we'll have a reserve bank in Kyiv.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear chair. So I was really happy to talk to you, and let's be in touch if you want to ask me.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I wish you all the best as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.
You do the same. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Это шоу Will.